Hey, friends and listeners. Welcome back to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, your true crime podcast that looks at things from the distinct perspective of two 911 dispatchers.
Episode 3.
Choosing who you become, the hero.
Today, I tell Jess about the second Stayner brother who, despite a lifetime of pain, became a hero. Last week, we talked about Cary Stayner and the crimes he committed. This week, we'll be talking about his brother Stephen's experience. Stephen was abducted on December 4th, 1972, when he was just 7 years old in Merced, California. His abductor was Kenneth Parnell, a child molester. Stephen would be held captive by Kenneth for 7 years. Stephen was approached by Irvin Edward Murphy, who was friends with convicted child rapist Kenneth Parnell. They both worked together at Yosemite National Park, and Irvin approached Stephen as he was walking home from school, asking the young boy if his mother would like to donate money to their church. Stephen told Irvin he thought she would, and Irvin offered to give Stephen a ride home. He told Stephen that Kenneth was the pastor of the church, and so Stephen accepted the ride and got into the white Buick. Kay, the mother who I mentioned, told the documentary that all of her kids basically were raised to respect their elders and do whatever their elders said. And she felt like this kind of led to Stephen being abducted in some way. Kenneth drove right past Stephen's home and took the 7-year-old to his cabin in Kathy's Valley instead. The cabin was only several hundred feet from his maternal grandmother's cabin. Kenneth proceeded to molest Stephen the first night at the cabin, and just 13 days later, on December 17th, he raped the 7-year-old, and Stephen told Kenneth many times during that first week that he wanted to go home. Kenneth would tell Stephen that he had obtained custody of Stephen because his parents were upset with him, no longer wanted him because they couldn't afford to take care of him. He told Stephen that his new legal name was Dennis Gregory Parnell, and he enrolled Stephen in school under that name. They moved frequently, and Kenneth told everyone that he was Dennis's father. But at the time of his abduction, his older brother Cary was 11. And if you'll remember, he says he started having these fantasies and obsessions.
He was like 7 years old.
Yeah. Kenneth allowed Stephen to begin drinking at a young age. He was also allowed to come and go as he pleased, and Stephen would later admit he probably had many opportunities to flee, but was scared to end up in a boys' home and believed his family no longer wanted him. He was also unsure who to ask for help. And at one point, I think he even tried to run away, but it was dark outside and he got scared. So he went back. During his time in captivity, Stephen was given a dog by Parnell named Queenie, and I think that when he is found, I think he still had Queenie because there's this whole TV series made about this and the dogs in the TV series. I don't know if that was just for dramatic effect, but also there's a dog in like the video footage of when he actually was found. And I remember this only because the dogs looked completely unalike, and I was like, they could have found a better lookalike dog. Nova was like, okay,
Right.
That's what you're noticing, Mom? He would also tell investigators that for a period of 18 months, a woman by the name of Barbara Mathis had lived with him. During this time, both Barbara and Kenneth raped Stephen multiple times. He was only 9 at the time when she started living there.
Awful.
And in 1975, Barbara and Kenneth attempted to abduct another young boy, but were not successful. Barbara would later tell investigators she had no idea Stephen was abducted and that his real name wasn't Dennis.
Oh, okay.
But she was going to help abduct another boy.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I didn't know, but I did all this horrible stuff to him.
Exactly. Oh, I didn't know he wasn't his kid. If I had known... No, you're a terrible human.
Yeah, she's a horrible, horrible person. Over the course of 7 years that Stephen was with Kenneth, he was brutally raped and molested multiple times. And as Stephen got older, Kenneth attempted to enlist him in the attempt to kidnap another young boy. It appears that as he hit puberty, Stephen was not as alluring to Kenneth, and he was trying to find a replacement.
Oh,
Stephen repeatedly... Yeah, isn't it disgusting? I told you, it just gets worse. Stephen repeatedly told Kenneth he would not help kidnap another young boy. And on February 14th, 1980, with the help of Stephen's friend, Randall Poorman, another young boy was abducted. So apparently, Stephen wouldn't help him.
How does he have all these friends that will just help him abduct children?
Well, this isn't even Kenneth's friend. This is Stephen's friend. So a teenage boy that Stephen knew. And it doesn't go into great detail.
That doesn't make sense either. That's even crazier.
Well, who knows? Maybe he molested this Randall kid too. Because if you watch the documentary, there's kids who knew him as Dennis who come on there. They're not kids anymore. Obviously, they're adults.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But they say stuff like, Stephen tried to never let us be alone with him. They didn't ever want anyone at his house. There was a part where he was drinking with his friends once and he started crying and said he wanted to go home. And his friends were like, what are you talking about? Your home's right there. Like, you can go home. Like, they didn't get it, obviously. but he didn't feel like he could open up. And then it's just like, they don't go into a lot of detail about what happened to him, which I think is good.
Yeah.
When he was first with police too, he would not admit that he was raped. Like, he just couldn't. He didn't want to admit that had happened. He never wanted to talk about it. Even after he went back to live with his family, he could never really talk about it, partially because his family didn't ever want to talk about it. So I don't know about the sexual abuse in that family. Like, from the sounds of it, some of it is probably true.
Right.
I don't know the extent of it. I don't know if it really went back 5 generations. I don't know. But it sounds like, I don't know, maybe he went from one shitty situation to another shitty situation. Yeah, I don't know. At the least, I know that they did not talk about their feelings, right? Because they'd be seen as quote unquote crazy.
Well, and they couldn't even cry, so.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking to know that he went through all of that. And then he felt like he couldn't talk about it. So the young boy who was abducted was named Timmy White, and Stephen would come home to find Timmy and Kenneth at the residence. Kenneth told Stephen that Timmy was his new brother. And this is February 14th, so Valentine's Day. On March 1st, 1980, while Kenneth was at his night security job, to which I say, how the fuck did he get a security job? Why did security officers keep getting hired that have backgrounds? But then I'm like, well, maybe he had a different last name. I don't know. But he was already a convicted rapist. I hope we have better background checks now. Anyway.
Well, I think they do, considering that it's been a couple of decades since then, you know.
I hope so. Stephen took Timmy and the two hitchhiked 40 miles to Ukiah, which is Timmy's hometown. After attempting to find Timmy's home, they went to the police station where Stephen would make the infamous statement, "I know my name is Stephen." That's what he would tell officers. Which, the mini TV series that I mentioned earlier would be named later, depicting the trials that Stephen had gone through. So they did this, I think it was a 2-parter. I didn't watch it. It's from the 80s or the 80s. And it just shows from the time he was kidnapped on. On March 2nd, Kenneth was arrested for the abduction of both boys, and in his background check, they found he had a previous conviction from 1951 of sodomy. On March 2nd, both the boys were also reunited with their family. Parnell was not charged with the numerous sexual assaults on Stephen and other boys because most of them had occurred outside the jurisdiction of Merced County, and they were outside the statute of limitations. Because fuck the statute of limitations, I'm sorry, but...
And also, like, what a slap in the face to the victims that all of this happened, but sorry, we can't charge him.
It's, like, disgusting. So, the Mendocino County prosecutors, acting almost entirely alone, decided not to prosecute Parnell for the sexual assaults that occurred in their jurisdiction. And then Murphy, for helping kidnap Stayner, and Poorman for helping kidnap White, were convicted of lesser charges. Both claimed they knew nothing of the sexual assaults. Okay, but you still kidnapped somebody.
Yeah, again, like, it doesn't make what you've done any better.
Yeah. Matthias is never arrested. And then Stephen would say that he called Murphy, like, Uncle Murphy, and he was kind to him in the first weeks of captivity, which I'm like, well, yeah, you're going to think anyone's kind to you who's not raping you. Like, fuck that kindness. He fucking kidnapped you. Sorry. It makes me very mad. Stephen's kidnapping and the aftermath prompted California lawmakers to change state laws to allow consecutive prison terms in similar abduction cases. That's a quote. So after returning to his family, Stephen had trouble adjusting to the structured household, also probably all the dysfunction that was going on in there. Okay. And he wasn't allowed to smoke and drink like he was when he lived with Parnell.
Also the fact that he went through this awful... Like, I don't wish that on anyone, right? He went back to this house where we already know that emotions aren't allowed.
Yeah, he can't process it, right?
Yeah, and he's...
And it's 7 years. Half of his life.
Man, if I had to choose between being held captive and being murdered, hey, just murder me.
Please don't say that. I would be so sad.
I'm not saying I want that to happen. It's just, between the two, I mean... Do I want to be murdered or do I want to be held captive and go through that continual horror over and over again? Like, no.
No. How terrifying would it be that your whole entire life is literally just you being told how much your family doesn't want you and being raped by this man and just living in that? That's your new, quote, normal? No, I'm with you. I'd rather be murdered too.
Right? Exactly.
In an interview with Newsweek, Stephen would say, I returned almost a grown man, and yet my parents saw me at first as their 7-year-old. After they stopped trying to teach me the fundamentals all over again, it got better. But why doesn't my dad hug me anymore? Everything has changed. Sometimes I blame myself. I don't know, sometimes if I should have come home. Would I have been better off if I didn't?
Oh, man. Jeez.
That statement right there, would he have been better off if he didn't come home? Would he have been better off if he had stayed with this man who is raping him than coming home?
Oh, it's just coming from like one damaging situation to a completely new but still yet damaging situation.
Yep. So apparently he had a brief time of counseling, but he never sought additional treatment. He refused to disclose all the details of sexual abuse he endured, which, if that's what protects him, then you do you.
Absolutely.
Nobody needs to go through that trauma all over again.
Right.
In 2007, in an interview, Stayner's sister said that her brother did not seek counseling because their father said Stayner didn't need any. She added, and this is a quote, Stephen got on with his life, but he was pretty messed up. He was bullied by other children at school for being molested and eventually dropped out, to which I say, fuck mean kids.
Kids are so
How messed up can you be?
Teach kids to be better. Like, just, if you see your kids being an asshole, just teach them to be nicer.
Yeah, just be better, okay? I love kids. I have 4 kids. I chose to take care of kids because I'm a crazy person, and I was like, I'm gonna be a pediatric nurse. But, like, just teach your kids to be nice.
Right.
And being teased for being molested? How is that a thing?
It's awful.
It's heartbreaking. So he eventually drops out and begins drinking frequently. And then he gets kicked out of his family home, which, like, okay, he can't go to freaking counseling, but you're going to kick him out?
Well, you're expecting them to not even feel emotion to begin with. You want them to be quote unquote normal, but that's not even what you want. You want them to be robots. And to have somebody to go through a situation like that and come out quote unquote normal, like, that's pretty impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially without counseling.
Especially even without being in an accepting household.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing, right? And I think I've said this before. Maybe I have. Maybe I've just said it to you. It sucks because his whole life just sucked. His whole life sucked, right? But, like, blood family, if they're toxic, isn't always the best option for you. Cut that shit off. I'm speaking from experience. Cut that shit off. Just because they're your family doesn't mean that they have the right to be a part of your life if them being a part of their life is hurting you.
Absolutely. And in my opinion, that means less than your found family. And my family is great.
I know, your mom's amazing.
She's pretty great. But that whole, like, blood is thicker than water, like, cool, so syrup. Like, it doesn't mean, okay, sure. It doesn't mean anything. That holds no value. If the people are bad for you, it doesn't matter if they're blood related or not. Like, you still have to protect yourself. You don't owe them anything.
Yeah.
So your family can be so much more important than your blood relatives.
Well, also, like, if anyone in your life is telling you you're crazy because you have feelings, that's my scissors. That's my scissor noise.
Cut them out.
Just let it go. His relationship with his father remained strained. Surprise, surprise.
Oh, I'm so shocked.
And in 1985, Stephen married Jody Edmondson, and they had 2 children, a daughter named Ashley and a son named Stephen Jr. He worked with child abduction groups, spoke to children about personal safety, and gave interviews about the kidnapping. He would later join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just before his death. And at the time of his death, Stephen was living in Merced and worked at a pizza shop. He also had a brief role in the television miniseries that was based on his experience as one of the officers who was escorting 14-year-old Stephen through the crowd when he returned home, which I thought was cool. Yeah. And according to the documentary I watched, he wanted to be a police officer. That was his goal. So it was kind of cool for him to be able to play a police officer. Like, he was excited about it.
And how amendable is that? That he went through and he experienced 7 years of pure hell. And like, it kind of bounces back to what they said about his birth family, right? The, like, 5 generations of abusers and the victims that go through that and turn around and then themselves become the abusers. Well, instead of perpetuating that cycle, he decided to take this horrible thing that happened to him and try to alleviate that for other people, to talk to kids about safety, to talk to to talk to groups about child abduction instead of falling into that cycle of the, oh, well, this is what my family does.
I was going to say, look at how different the brothers turned out, right?
Right.
Instead of continuing that abuse, like you're saying, and continuing that cycle of abuse, Stephen was like, no, I'm going to help people, even though he was obviously hurting inside.
Oh, God, yeah.
And was not healing from his trauma and had all of this unresolved shit that he was going through, right? He chose to do something better. Whereas his brother, who was not abducted, I mean, obviously these, per him, who knows, these fantasies started before his brother was even abducted. So, like, what the fuck happened to him that led to all this shit, right? Who knows? Like, and I don't know because there's no confirmed thing that I can find that all this stuff did happen, but I mean, it's in this book, and he does say that this happened, and there are other family members who also said it happened. I think at least some of it probably happened, okay?
Let me just say, I don't know if I'd be as strong as Stephen was.
Nope. No. Speaking as somebody who was molested when they were younger and had a lot of trauma in their life, even when you do go to counseling, because I've been to lots of counseling, it never leaves you. And then to have a family who doesn't support you. Speaking as somebody who doesn't have a family that supports them. It's very sucky. But I didn't go through 7 years of being locked up and told my family didn't want me at 7 years old.
Awful.
This is the thing, right? He was super strong afterwards. But think of the strength it took for him at 14 years old, after years of this, knowing, like, even if he felt like, oh, I don't want to go to a boys' home, right? Even though if he was scared to be put somewhere worse, right? He wanted to take Timmy home because he saw on TV, he saw Timmy's disappearance. He saw the family looking for him, and he didn't want what happened to him. He knew somehow on a level, he knew this shit's not right. I'm not going to let someone else go through this. I'm going to take him home. And then to hitchhike for 40 miles in the middle of the night, and from some of the stuff I saw and read, it was like pouring rain, and he was just like, no, fuck this, it stops now.
Exactly.
Like the strength just in that moment, but then the years after it took, and then to have to return to this dysfunctional family, right, that who knows what the fuck happened to him when he came home. For him to go on and to help other people, and then to him to have these kids, and from all the things I saw and read, he was a great father. He loved his kids a lot. He wasn't around for long because on September 16th, 1989, he sustained fatal head injuries while he was on his way home on his motorcycle from work, and he was hit by a car in a hit-and-run accident.
Oh my God, this poor human.
His whole life, right?
Yeah.
How sucky. Sometimes I sit and I think how it's just so unfair sometimes that some people go through so much in their life just to die.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And this is one of those cases. After I saw this, I had to sit there for a minute and be like
process things.
Wow, this sucks.
Right. Yeah.
I told you, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
This is deep. The driver of the car was later identified by witnesses and taken into custody. 500 people attended his funeral, and 14-year-old Timmy White was a pallbearer at his funeral.
Oh, gosh, That made me emotional.
I know. I have goosebumps and I'm gonna cry, and I'm trying not to. Okay. In early 1989, the television miniseries based on his experience is released. I Know and My Name is Steven. That's when he takes the leave of absence from his job, and he gets to play the policeman. He doesn't say anything. He was pleased with the series, and he would go on and do interviews about it, but he would say some of the things weren't completely right. And he did complain that sometimes he was seen as obnoxious and rude, especially toward his parents. And then he would say, which isn't me, I'm actually a good kid, probably because they had to dramatize it, right? And the production received an Emmy Award nomination, and Mike Eccles, who had researched the story and interviewed Stayner and Parnell, among many others, wrote the manuscript, basically. And this new documentary that I recently watched plays these interviews that he did. He taped them all. And then it also has actors who played Stephen and played these people, Stephen's brother, in the film, come and read the manuscript. So, they read the interviews, which I thought was kind of cool. It was kind of a different take. So this is the quote that he says when he finally comes home, right? He says, Quote, "My name is Stephen Stayner. I'm 14 years of age. I don't know my true birth date, but I use April 18th, 1965. I know my first name is Stephen. I'm pretty sure my last name is Stayner, and if I have a middle name, I don't know it." Which is just like...
It's heartbreaking.
Ugh. It's just awful. So, it just gets worse and worse and worse, okay?
Oh, but it's already so bad.
I know, but this whole story is just like...
Oh, it keeps getting worse. I thought we were almost done.
We are. In 2004, Parnell, 72 years old, is convicted of trying the previous year to persuade his caretaker sister to procure a young boy for him for $500.
Oh, God.
So he tries to get someone else to abduct another boy for him.
Just trash.
She knows about Parnell's past, so she turns him in. And then Timmy White, who was a grown man at the time, is subpoenaed to testify in Parnell's criminal trial. Mm-hmm. Stephen is deceased at this time, but they use his testimony at the previous trial and this trial as evidence. Parnell dies of natural causes on January 21st, 2008 at the California Medical Facility while serving a sentence of 25 years to life. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Pause. Okay? Because basically, in the 1981 trial, he was tried for kidnapping Stayner and White, but not for the sexual abuse. I just forgot to include, he was convicted of the kidnappings and only served 5 years of a 7-year prison sentence.
Wow.
So basically, he was sentenced to the same amount of time that he had Stephen and did these horrible, awful things to him. Ended up only serving 5 years after he kidnapped, repeatedly raped Stephen, put him through all this shit, then kidnapped Timmy, put him through who knows what, and he only gets a 7-year sentence and then serves only 5.
Again, it's such a slap in the face to his victims.
Yep. Murphy, I didn't tell you how long he was sentenced to. He was sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment, paroled after 2 years. Sean Poorman, who helped kidnap White, was sentenced to a term in a juvenile work camp because he was a child at the time. So, at the time of the 2004 conviction for when he tries to get his caregiver's sister to kidnap a 4-year-old boy for him for $500, he's 71 years old. He has diabetes, emphysema, and other medical issues that were brought on by a stroke, requiring near 24-hour-a-day nursing care. And still, this sicko, that's all he can think about.
So gross.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, gross.
He's convicted on February 9th for that, on charges of attempting to purchase a child, attempted child molestation, even though no child had been targeted. To which I say he wasn't convicted for the sexual crimes against Stephen, which he obviously did. The prosecution successfully argued sexual aids and pornography found in the apartment, along with Stephen's own testimony, were enough to prove that Parnell had intended to rape the child. So then he's sentenced to 25 years to life, just because this is his 3rd strike, and California has the 3 strikes law. Anyway, he was incarcerated until his death, and then he died of natural causes. He had been under hospice care for some time, and he died January 21st of 2008, which is just, the whole thing is just heartbreaking and disgusting. Okay, so Timothy White would grow up and he grew up, he got married, had 2 kids. This is per the New York Times. He worked as a sheriff's deputy in Los Angeles County in 2005. On April 1st, 2010, he passed away at the age of 35 from a pulmonary embolism.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. About 5 months later, on August 28th of 2010, a statue of Stephen and Timmy was dedicated in Applegate Park in Merced. Residents of Ukiah, Timmy's hometown, had carved a statue showing a teenage Stephen with a young Timmy in hand while escaping their captivity, which is just like so sad. Because in all of this, not only did they have all this shit happen to them, but then they died too young. Their kids had to grow up without fathers. And this disgusting piece of shit got to die.
He lives until he's 70.
Yeah, of natural causes. I mean, granted, he was in prison. Finally, he was in prison. But what the hell?
Yeah.
There's also, I guess, the parents of Stephen tried to get like a park named after him in their hometown, but they didn't want to do that because they were afraid. They wanted it to be called Stayner Park or something like that. But they were afraid that instead of associating it with Stephen, it would be associated with his brother.
Makes sense.
Which I understand.
Yeah.
But this whole case, I was like, we have to cover this case because holy shit, How did I not know about all of this?
That's true. How did you not know about
Of
this?
years and years of obsessing over true crime. And also, like, how crazy is it that in one family, two brothers can turn out so differently from each other? So this is my thought. It's this one brother is abducted, has all this horrible shit happen to him, turns out to be a pretty good person. This other brother, yes, he has to live through his brother's abduction, but then he turns out to be a serial killer. So what did Stephen really come home to?
Seriously.
And what did he mean when he said, would I have been better off? Did he know his brother had these thoughts? Probably not, because he said he never shared it with anyone. But, like, how did they turn out so differently?
Yeah, right? Like, that's the thing, is that Stephen decided to kind of stop that cycle. And he turned it around, and instead of taking his pain and pushing it onto the next victim and so on and so forth, he was like, no, enough people have suffered and this needs to stop. And that kind of speaks to the type of person he is. The kind of, even at 14, like you said, his fear was ending up in a boys' home or something like that. And that's why, well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why he didn't run away all those times before.
Yep.
Why he stayed, because he was afraid of what would happen if he wasn't in this household. But then comes along another little boy and he sacrifices all that. What he's afraid of happening. You know, I may end up in a boys' home. I may be put into the system, but I will do that so this little boy doesn't have to go through what I went through. And that's huge. Like, that's a hero. He's a hero.
Yep. 100% he was a hero. 100%. And it's really sad.
To do that is just incredible.
After all the stuff he went through, right? After not having this horrible childhood. I mean, they did jump around and they went from school to school, but who knows the education that he actually got.
Right.
It's also really sad because it sounds like he was also teased before he came back because he was kind of dirty because he wasn't taken care of, really. And he didn't really have clothes. Like, he had like a couple pairs of clothes that he just repeatedly wore. And I was watching this and I was like, God, I gotta start making Jude wear more clothes. I don't know why that's the thought that came to my mind.
Sure, of course.
But Jude is my 11-year-old son, will wear the same clothes literally every day if I let him. I have to tell him every day, and I do tell him every day, Jude, please put on a different shirt. You wore that shirt yesterday. Jude, you need to wear different pants. You wore those pants yesterday. Jude, you have a giant hole in those pants. Please get rid of them. Please wear something different today. You don't want to be the kid that everyone makes fun of for wearing dirty clothes because kids are mean.
Because kids are mean, yeah.
Anyway, that's all I could think about. I was like, that poor kid. Not only do you have to go through all this shit at home and you're not safe, then you have to go to school with all these kids who make fun of you and are
Jerks.
assholes.
Like, first of all, it's nobody's business what that kid is going through.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, and who knows if those bullies even thought about why things were like the way they were?
They just think about themselves and being cool with kids. I mean, I know an adult or two like that too, so,
yeah.
You know.
But to go through the absolute hell that he went through for 7 years, only to get out of that hell and end up in a different kind of hell, to still be unsafe and sad, and then to want to help people at the end of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Could you ask for a better person? You know what I mean? He had his problems because he went through shit. Nobody is going to go through all of that and come out on the other side not messed up, right? And you can get help and you can work through it. And you can wake up every day and decide to smile and do all that, but it doesn't mean that you aren't dealing with shit. And he's a stronger person, was a stronger person than I could be.
It's really sad because it sounds like, too, his kids they didn't really talk about Stephen after he died. And then his mom, according to the documentary, his mom married someone else who didn't like his father and didn't really let them talk about him.
Oh, man.
It just sounds like that whole family has gone through, don't have any feelings, you're not allowed to talk about things. And that's not really a healthy way to cope.
Nope, not at all.
And just my advice to anybody who's been through some shit, talk to someone.
Yes.
Even if it's your friend. Even if you don't want to go to a counselor at first. Like, sometimes it takes a while before you realize that you actually need to. In my experience, it took me not being able to get out of bed for my kids for me to go talk to someone. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to get to that point. So, like, just talk to someone. Work through it. Don't be one of those people who says, oh, feelings are lame. You can't have feelings. Let's not talk about it. You can't cry. Like his family, because they sound like a bunch of assholes.
Your feelings are valid. Brittany knows this. I tell it to her all the time. Your feelings are valid.
Thank you, Jessica, for being in my corner. It's just a really sad story, and it's honestly like, it doesn't feel real.
It is crazy how much came out of like one single household.
It's like if Hollywood wrote this story, people would be like, that's not a believable story.
That's too crazy.
But it's real.
Right.
It's very rare that we just have like nothing to say because we're just kind of like
Yeah.
emotionally drained.
Well, and I feel kind of bad too when you were telling the story and I wasn't saying much. Like I was emoting, there were things happening. I was like shaking my head.
Lots of big eyes.
Yeah, and my forehead and my hands, and I mean, lots of things. Like I said, were happening. Just
hey, I
nothing
warned
that
you.
was too audible.
Worse and worse and worse.
Yeah,
and
no kidding.
worse. I mean, on a scale of 1 to I married my best friend's murderer, it's like 10 times past that.
Yeah.
Because I remember there were lots of comments to me after we did that podcast where she married her best friend's murderer. This is like worse than that.
Definitely.
Anyway, I'm sorry to tell you this sad story before you go to bed. I hope it doesn't keep you up like it did for me.
I mean, yeah, I am emotionally exhausted. I need a Disney movie.
You should just do that. Because anything that makes you happy, because literally, I mean, it took me a couple hours to write up the story that I told you, and afterwards I was like, I need a
nap.
I need to relax. I feel exhausted. I didn't even go through this.
Yeah, and it's not even like it's a roller coaster, right? It's just a plummet. It starts and then it gets worse and worse and worse, and there's no incline again.
That's what I'm telling you. It's a horrible story. If somebody wrote this story, someone would be like, we cannot publish this. It's just gonna make people depressed.
It's too sad. Yeah, exactly. It's depressing.
There's no good aspect to this. I'm sorry, sir. We cannot publish your story.
Well,
I hope you'll listen next time. I know that was a real bummer, but please come back for our next episode.
I mean, it's still going to be true crime, so it'll still probably be death, but Brittany, can the next one maybe not be as much of a bummer?
Well, like you said, it's true crime, so I can't promise that. But I'll try and include a 911 call next time. How about that?
Okay.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Truth Lies and Alibis.